I'm Bernice Dalton, 74 years old, and the day my youngest son Aldrich called me in tears, I didn't hesitate for a second, he said. They were being evicted, that the landlord had sold their apartment building, and they had nowhere to go. His wife Delilah was crying in the background, and the kids, Tabitha and Wade, were in the car with their backpacks packed. "Come on over," I told him. "The house is big, there's plenty of room." It was October, drizzling outside, and I remember Aldrich carrying boxes up the porch, while Delilah stood in the entryway. She looked around like she was sizing the place up, her hand brushing the banister like she was already imagining it was hers. The children ran up and down the hallway, thrilled by the space after their cramped two-bedroom rental, and I just stood there, holding the door open, telling myself this was what family was for. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever opened your door to family thinking it was just temporary. I've lived in this house in southern Ohio for over 2 decades. My husband and I bought it back in the 80s, a 2-story 4-bedroom with a little garden out back where I grew roses. We raised both our sons here. Aldrich and his older brother Quentin. After my husband passed, the place felt too quiet, too still. I'd worked as a nurse nearly 40 years, retired early, and filled my days with books, gardening, and an old radio that played classical music in the afternoons. When Aldrich asked if they could stay a few months, it felt almost like the house was waking up again. Delilah lost her job at the dental clinic, and Aldrich was working long hours at a body shop. There wasn't much to their name, but I never brought that up. I gave them the upstairs 2 bedrooms and a small bathroom, and I stayed in my room downstairs by the kitchen. It all seemed reasonable at first. The first month went by quiet. We didn't eat meals together. Everyone had their own routines. Delilah looked for work. The kids went to school. Aldrich got home late and left early. But then small things started changing. Delilah asked if she could move the living room furniture to make space for the kids to do homework. Before I could answer, she'd already started dragging my sofa across the room. Next, my mother's embroidered tablecloth was replaced with something plastic and bright. "It's better for the children," she said. "Less risk of spills." I told myself not to be sentimental, that it was just a tablecloth. But when it never came back out of the cupboard, I noticed by spring the talk of finding a new place had all but stopped. Delilah got a job at a private clinic, and Aldrich came home with a giant flat screen he'd been paid with for a side job. My old TV ended up in my bedroom. "You'll have more peace and quiet," Delilah told me. The fridge began to fill with food I didn't recognize. "And my cottage cheese and lettuce got pushed behind soda bottles and frozen waffles," she started saying. Instead of you have, we have guests tonight, or we have plans this weekend." My house had somehow become our house. At first, the noise of children running up and down the stairs made me smile. It reminded me of when my boys were small, but over time, the sound turned sharp. Delilah stopped asking before having people over. She just informed me I'd find my music turned off and someone else's show playing loud through the house. My favorite coffee cup went missing. Delilah shrugged, said maybe it broke, but I found it a week later, shoved behind a stack of jam jars. Nothing was ever really gone, just moved. Hidden. Replaced last summer. She tore up my rose garden to build a sandbox and swing set. "The kids need somewhere to play," she said, tossing my rose bushes behind the shed. There was nowhere else to replant them. It felt like something in me had been pulled up by the roots by fall. I realized I'd started adjusting my schedule to theirs. My days were built around when Delilah wanted the kitchen, when the kids were watching TV, when her friends came over. I was being careful with my footsteps, careful with my music, careful with my words. The children started repeating Delilah's phrases, asking why I left plates in the sink, or why my room smelled like old people. They weren't trying to be cruel. They were just following her lead when I asked about their plans to find a new place. Delilah said prices were high, and nothing suitable had come up. Aldrich told me to be patient, that things would work out, but their things were everywhere now. Her laundry filled the bathroom. His tools cluttered the garage. They weren't looking for a new home. They already had one, and I was no longer the owner. Just the old woman who happened to live there next Sunday. I planned a small tea with friends, just a few women I'd known for years. Delilah told me the living room wasn't available. Said Tabitha's birthday was that day. But when I asked my granddaughter about it later, she looked puzzled. "Grandma, my birthday's in October. You know that." I stood in the hallway that night listening to Delilah laugh on the phone, inviting her friend Cynthia and her kids over for tea in the same living room I'd been told I couldn't use. That was the moment I stopped asking for permission. On Sunday morning, I woke up early, baked a spice cake, and set the kitchen table with care. I'd promised Clara she wouldn't have to sit on a hard chair. This time her back had been acting up, and I meant to keep my word. At 1 o'clock, Mara called to confirm. "We're meeting in the living room, right?" she asked. "Clara won't manage the kitchen chairs. I promised I'd take care of it." Delilah was in the bathroom painting her nails. I knocked lightly on the door and stepped halfway in. "Delilah, would it be all right if we used the living room for a couple of hours, just so Clara can be comfortable?" She didn't look up. "No," she said, focusing on the brush in her hand. "Cynthia's bringing the kids over today. I already told you." I hesitated. "But they're not here yet. Maybe we could sit for a bit before they arrive." This time, she looked up. "Bernice, I don't want the whole house smelling like old lady perfume when they get here." I stood there for a moment, unsure what to say. "They're my friends," I said quietly. "We don't just sit around and talk about aches and pains." She laughed, not kindly. "Sure, about how everything was better back in your day and how kids today don't have any manners. Same thing?" She bent over her nail polish again, but something in me refused to step back this time. "This is my house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've lived here 23 years. I have the right to invite my friends into the living room." Delilah shot up from her stool, knocking over the little glass bottle. The red polish spilled across the white counter like blood spreading in water. She cursed under her breath, grabbed a wad of tissues, and started blotting at it furiously. "See what happens when you come in here with your demands," she snapped. "I didn't mean to." "Just shut up," she said. "I'm tired of you and your friends and your so-called plans. Every week it's something. You want this, you want that. It's inconvenient. It's too loud. It's not to your taste. This isn't your retirement home. Bernice, we live here. We have kids. We have lives, and you're always interfering." She rubbed harder at the stain, but it only smeared further. "We live here," she said again. "We're not guests, and if something doesn't work for you, that's your problem, not ours." She stepped out of the bathroom and left the door swinging behind her. I stood there staring at the counter, the red mark still bleeding at the edges. Half an hour later, I called Mara and told her I wasn't feeling well. It wasn't a lie. That evening, Cynthia arrived with her children. Laughter filled the house. Plates clinked. The television played something loud and cheerful in the background. I sat in my room, listening to the noise, remembering how Delilah had screamed that it wasn't my house. The house I'd helped pay off the house where my children were born, where my husband had taken his last breath. Not my house. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I turned that conversation over in my mind again and again. I thought about talking to Aldrich, trying once more to make him see how things had become. But what would I say that I hadn't already tried? He loved his wife. The kids were used to their routines. Maybe Delilah was right. Maybe it was time for them to have a place of their own. But even thinking it felt like turning my back on everything my husband and I had built. By Wednesday, I'd made a decision. I took the deed out of the drawer in my bedroom closet. It had my name on it, and only mine. After my husband passed, I hadn't added anyone else. That was the one thing no one could take from me, no matter how often they rearranged the furniture or told me where to put my dishes. I looked up a few real estate agencies and found one in the city center. I didn't want anyone local just in case someone we knew recognized my name. My hands shook a little as I dialed the number. New Horizons Realty, a woman answered. How can I help you? I'd like to speak with someone about a property appraisal, I said. We set up a meeting for the following afternoon. I told no one. When Friday came, I left quietly after breakfast, and no one noticed I was gone. Delilah had errands, the kids were watching cartoons, and Aldrich was under the hood of a neighbor's car. At the office, I was met by a woman named Patricia. She looked to be in her 40s and had the calm, practical tone of someone who'd seen a little of everything. I told her about the house, 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, a modest garden, and 20 years of care in every corner. She took notes, did some rough math, and said the place could go for somewhere between $120,000 and $140,000 depending on the buyer. We'd need to do a full appraisal to be sure, she added, but I think you'll be pleased. She handed me a few brochures for smaller properties around town, apartments mostly. One in particular caught my eye. A modest 2-bedroom in a building near the park. Small kitchen, bright living room, a quiet neighborhood with a grocery store and a clinic nearby. Enough space for one person. Enough for a tea set and a shelf of books. No swing set. No shouting. I thanked her and left with the brochures tucked beneath old family photographs in my drawer at home. The next day, as I stood rinsing a plate at the sink, I heard Delilah on the phone again. She's not going anywhere. She laughed. Where would she go? She's got her little routine, her pills, her photos. She won't leave. A pause then. Let her mutter. Old people always find something to grumble about. At least the kids are growing up in a real house, not some shoebox apartment. That evening, I sat with Aldrich while he read the paper. Son, I said, maybe it's time for you and Delilah to find a place of your own. He frowned. Mom, where is this coming from? I hesitated. I just think we're all a little crowded. We've looked, he said, but nothing's been right. Too expensive, too far, too small. I nodded. Still, maybe it's time to try again. He sighed. Delilah said you were upset about something with your friends. It's not just that. He put the paper down and looked at me. Mom, this is your home. We're just trying to help. And Delilah, she just wants to feel settled. Later that night, I walked past their bedroom and heard Delilah talking to Aldrich again. She said maybe I needed help, psychological, maybe medical. Maybe it's the early signs of something, she whispered. She's always upset she doesn't want to be around the kids. Maybe a facility would be better. A facility, Aldrich asked. You know, a retirement home, someplace with people her age. She might even like it. That was the moment I stopped wavering. I called Patricia the next morning and told her I was ready for the appraisal. 2 days later, she and a colleague came to the house. I told the family they were from an insurance company. Delilah barely looked up. They took measurements, checked the plumbing, looked at the garden. Patricia was pleased. It's a lovely property, she said. I think $135,000 is realistic. That evening, I went with her to view a few listings. 2 were too small. 1 felt just right. A 4th-floor apartment with wide windows and a little view of the park. The kitchen wasn't fancy, but it had a good light over the sink. The bedroom had a small, built-in closet. The price was $62,000, and Patricia said the seller might accept $60,000 in cash. I imagined myself sitting in that kitchen, the light catching on my teacup, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something settle inside me. That Thursday evening, Patricia called just after dinner. I stepped outside onto the back porch to hear her better. The sky was starting to darken, and the porch light clicked on behind me. Bernice, she said, we haven't even listed your house yet, but something came up. I think you'll want to hear this. She explained that a couple from her client database, Robert and Selena Baxter, had been searching for a home in my area. He worked at a local bank, she was a school teacher, and they had 2 young kids. They're ready to buy, Patricia said. They've already sold their apartment in Columbus and can pay in full. They're hoping to move before the end of the month. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. How much are they offering? I finally asked. $130, she said. Cash if we move quickly. She let the number settle between us, then added, They'd like to see the house this weekend. The next morning, I told Delilah I was visiting Mara for a few hours. She's feeling under the weather, I said, slicing apples for breakfast. Delilah nodded, barely listening. Hope she feels better, she muttered as she poured orange juice into Wade's cup. Aldrich didn't look up from his paper. Tabitha was on her tablet at the table. By 10, I was already walking the blocks around our neighborhood, waiting for the right time to circle back. I returned just before 11. A silver SUV was already parked by the curb. Patricia stood at the gate with a clipboard in her hand. The couple next to her looked younger than I'd expected, mid-30s, well put together, polite. We shook hands, and I invited them in. We started in the front room. Selena's eyes immediately went to the bay window. Oh, I can already see the sunlight in the mornings, she said. Perfect for reading. Robert asked about the roof, the plumbing, the furnace. I answered each question as best I could. Upstairs, they peeked into the bedrooms, and Selena smiled at the built-in shelves in the kids' room. It feels like home, she said softly. We stepped outside to look at the backyard. The swing set Delilah had insisted on last year stood to one side, the paint chipped a bit from weather. The garden was quiet. Our children would love this, Robert said. Room to run a place to plant vegetables, maybe? When we came back inside, Patricia took out a folder. They're ready to sign a preliminary agreement today if you're comfortable moving forward, she said. Closing would be mid-October. Robert glanced at me. Only if it works for you, he said. We know it's a big decision. I nodded. It is, I said, but yes. I think I'm ready. The contract was signed at the kitchen table. They handed me a deposit check, and just like that, the wheels were in motion. After they left, I sat in the quiet for a long time. The walls still looked the same. The rug underfoot hadn't moved. But something had shifted. This house had been mine for over 20 years. And now, it was someone else's future. On Monday, I met with Patricia again and told her I wanted the apartment. The seller's willing to drop the price to $58 if you're ready to close quickly, she said. You'll have plenty left over from the sale. We set a closing date just a few days after I'd hand the keys to the Baxters. It all moved faster than I expected. At home, I began sorting through closets when no one was around. I made 3 piles, one for things I needed, one for things to give away, and one for everything else. I opened an old drawer and found a stack of drawings from when the boys were little crayon stick figures with spiky hair and crooked houses. I picked the ones I remembered hanging on the fridge and put the rest aside. The hardest part was the photographs. I chose a few our wedding day, the boys on their first day of school Christmas morning from 15 years ago. The rest I left where they were. Let Aldrich decide what to keep. On October 13th, 2 days before the closing, I waited until after dinner to speak. The kids had gone quiet, and the only sound in the kitchen was the scrape of forks against plates. I have something to tell you, I said. Aldrich looked up from his plate. What's that? I've sold the house, I said. Delilah's fork slipped from her hand and clattered against the dish. Aldrich froze mid-bite. Wade looked at me, his eyes wide, and Tabitha's mouth hung slightly open. I signed the contract last week, I said. The buyers are moving in next week. The room stayed silent for a long moment. You sold it? Delilah finally asked. Without telling us I had the right. I said. The house is in my name. But we live here, she said, her voice rising. You can't just throw us out. We have children. I'm not throwing anyone out, I replied. But the house will belong to someone else soon. You'll need to find another place to live. Aldrich rubbed his face with both hands. Mom, why didn't you say something? We weren't ready for this. I've tried to talk to you both. More than once. Not like this, he said, shaking his head. You should have given us more time. I'm giving you 10 days, I said. That's what we have. Delilah pushed back from the table and stood. Her voice shook, not from sadness, but from fury. You're cruel, she said. Absolutely heartless. You destroyed this family. I didn't destroy anything I said. You told me this wasn't my house. So I made a decision. Aldrich looked up stunned. She said what Delilah didn't answer. Her silence spoke louder than anything she might have said. I've bought an apartment, I added. I move in the week after next. Tabitha turned to me. Grandma, where are we going to live? Before I could answer, Delilah slammed her hand on the table. Don't talk to her, she said. She doesn't care. She'd rather live alone than have her family nearby. Aldrich stood, walked toward me slowly. Mom. Why? His voice was quiet. I looked at him. This son I'd raised who had once brought me flowers just because he'd thought of me that day. Because I need peace, I said. Delilah's voice cut across the room. We've lived here for 2 years. That means something. We bought things for the house. We contributed. You bought curtains, I said. You built a shelf. We can fight this, she said. Contest the sale. Say you're not of sound mind. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Later that night, Aldrich came to my room. He stood in the doorway for a long time before speaking. I'm sorry, Mom, he said. I didn't see it. I should have stepped in sooner. You don't have to apologize, I told him. Just make sure you take care of those kids. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. Nobody talked over breakfast. Nobody turned on the television. Delilah didn't speak a word as she packed school lunches. That afternoon, a woman from a local law office called. Delilah Credle asked us to reach out, she said. She wants to explore options to pause the sale. I told her politely there was no basis to challenge it and hung up. An hour later, Delilah called me herself. Her voice was businesslike, clipped. We'll buy the house from you, she said. Not all at once, but in payments. A mortgage or something. I told her it was already sold. Then we'll go to court, she said. We'll say you're unstable, incompetent. I didn't say anything right away. Then I laughed. Not out of spite, just tiredness. You won't win that, I said, and you know it. The morning of the closing, I woke before the sun. The house was still dark quiet, in a way it hadn't been in months. I sat at the edge of my bed for a while, watching the soft shape of my packed suitcase by the door. The last thing I'd added was the porcelain teacup Aldrich gave me on my 60th birthday. It had a small chip in the handle, but I kept it anyway. Not everything needed to be perfect to have worth. Downstairs, the coffee pot was already brewing. Aldrich stood by the counter tying his shoes. You're up early, he said. I nodded and reached for a mug. Patricia's picking me up at 9. He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he poured me a cup and left the room. I took a few slow sips, then walked through each room one last time. In the living room, I touched the spot on the wall where the family portrait used to hang. In the hallway, I brushed my hand across the wood trim Harold and I had installed ourselves the summer after we moved in. I left the curtains open, let the light fill the space. At 9 sharp, Patricia pulled into the driveway. She gave me a small smile as she opened the passenger door. You ready? I nodded and climbed in. As we backed out, I didn't look behind me. The signing took place in a quiet office on the second floor of a modest brick building. Robert and Selena were already seated, their hands folded neatly on the polished table. They greeted me warmly. A notary entered with a stack of papers and began the process. Each signature came with a small pause. The sound of the pen on paper, the brief shuffle as the pages were flipped. Patricia stood behind me, occasionally pointing where I needed to sign. It wasn't until the last page that I realized I'd been holding my breath. "Congratulations," the notary said. "The house is officially theirs." Selena reached out and touched my hand. "We'll take good care of it," she said. "I promise," Robert added. "If you ever want to stop by, you're always welcome." I smiled, but I knew I wouldn't return. We stepped outside into the cool October air. Patricia turned to me. "The check will clear within 24 hours, she said. "The apartment keys will be ready tomorrow." I nodded. "Thank you for everything." She opened the car door for me. "There's just one thing," she said before I climbed in. "Delilah stopped by the agency yesterday, asked a lot of questions. I told her everything was already finalized, but you might want to be careful. She's angry." I didn't reply. There wasn't anything left to say. That afternoon, I took a cab to the apartment. I'd already signed the paperwork ahead of time, so the handoff was simple. The superintendent, Mr. Perry, met me out front and gave me the keys. "Elevators to the right," he said. "Unit 4C. Mailbox keys taped to the fridge. The building was older but clean. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish. When I opened the door to 4C, sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor. The windows overlooked a quiet street lined with trees just starting to turn. I walked through each room, setting down a single box in the kitchen. It didn't take long to unpack. I folded my clothes into the bedroom dresser, lined the bathroom shelf with my few bottles and brushes, and set the teacup on the kitchen windowsill. That evening, I heated up soup on the stovetop. I sat at the small table by the window and watched the light shift across the park. In the distance, a mother pushed a stroller while a boy ran ahead with a toy airplane. The radio played something soft and steady in the background. Just as I was rinsing my bowl, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Aldrich standing in the hallway holding a paper bag. "I brought you something," he said, lifting it. "Chicken pot pie from that place you like." I stepped aside to let him in. He looked around slowly, taking in the bare walls and simple furnishings. "It's nice," he said. "Quiet." I nodded. "That's what I wanted." He set the bag on the counter, then turned to face me. "Delilah's packing," he said. "We've got a temporary place. My buddy from work had a guest house he's letting us use for a month." I waited. "She's mad," he said. "She's saying things that don't make sense. That you tricked us. That you manipulated the sale." I followed every rule I said, every signature, every notice. "I know," he said. "I just thought you should know." He sat down at the table, folded his hands. "Tabitha cried when we moved the couch. She asked if you were mad at her." I swallowed. "I'm not." "I told her that," he said. "But she misses you." We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then he stood and moved toward the door. "If you need anything," he said, "you call me. Please." "I will." He hesitated, then leaned forward and kissed my cheek. "I'm sorry it got this far," he said. "Me too," I replied. After he left, I locked the door and stood in the center of the living room. The evening light made soft patterns on the walls. I reached for the small wooden box I'd brought with me, the one with my sewing kit, some stationery, and Harold's last letter. I opened the lid and placed it gently on the table. The house was gone. The kitchen table was gone. The shelf of family photos, the noise, the constant tension. But in its place, something new was beginning. 2 weeks after I moved into the apartment, I was putting away a grocery bag when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and stepped into the front hallway. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery man holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Wembley?" he asked when I opened the door. "Yes," I said. "This was dropped off for you," he said, handing me a thick manila envelope. Said it was urgent, signature required. I signed, thanked him, and closed the door. The envelope had no return address, only my name typed neatly on the front. Inside was a single-page letter printed on crisp white paper, and beneath it, a folded document with my old address listed in bold. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table and began to read. It was from a mortgage broker. The letter congratulated Mr. and Mrs. Aldrich Credle on their recent pre-approval for a loan, specifically a private refinance agreement using the estimated equity of the home on Cypress Lane. The numbers were detailed, and the second page held a signed intent to proceed. Delilah's name was at the bottom in careful cursive. Aldrich's was typed in. The document was dated 6 weeks before the sale. I stared at it for a long time, letting the weight of it settle. The timing made sense. Around the same time, Delilah had started making little comments about finally putting down roots and making the house truly ours. That same week, she'd rearranged the living room furniture and taken down my curtains. But this wasn't about curtains. I called Patricia. "Did you know about a loan application tied to the house from Aldrich or Delilah?" She paused. "No, and I would have seen something like that. If a lien had been placed, the sale would have stalled." "They didn't finish it," I said, "but they started the process, using the equity in the home." Patricia's tone shifted. "Without your consent, that could be considered fraud. Even if they didn't finalize it." I thanked her and hung up. Then I placed the document back into the envelope and slid it into the drawer beside my stove. That night, I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I called Aldrich. "I got something strange yesterday," I said. "A letter. It has your name on it. And Delilah's." There was a long pause. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "It's from a loan office," I said. "Says you applied to refinance the house. Before the sale." He went quiet again. "You signed nothing?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "I didn't even know she was looking into that. It has both your names." "I never saw it," he said. "She probably typed my name in to make it look good. She used the house as collateral," I said, "and it wasn't hers to touch." He didn't respond. "I haven't shown it to anyone yet," I said. Still silence. "I just wanted to hear it from you first." "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't." A few hours later, Delilah showed up at the building. She didn't call, didn't text, just rang the buzzer and waited. I debated not answering, but I pressed the intercom. "Yes, it's Delilah," she said. "Let me up. I think we're fine talking through the door." A pause. "I need to explain," she said. I didn't say anything. "I was trying to secure the house," she said finally. "For the kids, for our future. You used my property to try to get money. I thought we'd take over eventually anyway. You filled out a mortgage form. Behind my back." "It wasn't like that," she snapped. "We weren't going to follow through until we were sure. You signed it." She exhaled, frustrated. "It was never meant to get sent. It must have auto-submitted." I let the silence stretch out. "You crossed a line," I said. "We were just trying to plan ahead," she insisted. "It wasn't yours to plan with." For a moment, all I could hear was the faint static of the intercom. Then she said, "Are you going to report it?" "I haven't decided." "You'd really do that? You'd turn in your own family?" I didn't answer. "Think about what you're doing," she said. "It was a mistake." I pressed the button to disconnect the call. That weekend, I made a copy of the letter and placed it in a red folder along with a notarized statement confirming the date it arrived. I wrote Aldrich's name on the front. The original I sealed in a safe deposit box at the bank. I didn't take it to the authorities. Not yet. But I wanted it recorded, documented, a quiet record of what had been done. I didn't speak to Delilah again that month. Aldrich called once to check in. "She's been quiet," he said. "A little bitter. She says you're trying to ruin her life." "I'm not trying to ruin anyone," I said. "I'm just protecting mine." The apartment was starting to feel like home. I hung 2 paintings in the living room. I bought a small rug for the hallway. I began attending the Wednesday book club at the local library. There were 5 of us, all women over 60. We read slowly, drank tea, and sometimes never finished the book, but no one minded. It was during one of those afternoons that I received a text from Aldrich. "Can we meet, just us? I need to show you something." The diner sat on the corner of East Maple and Rosemont, just across from the library parking lot. I walked there straight from book club, my scarf pulled tight around my neck against the wind. Aldrich had asked for a quiet place, and that diner with its cracked leather booths and humming light fixtures had been around since I was young enough to sit at the counter with a milkshake and a dime. He was already there when I arrived, tucked into the booth by the window, a mug of coffee in front of him. He stood when he saw me and gestured for me to sit. Between us sat a manila folder. No writing on it, just sealed with the metal clasp edges slightly bent. "Thanks for coming," he said. His voice sounded tired, older than it had 2 weeks ago. I nodded and slid into the booth. The waitress came by and poured me coffee without asking. I wrapped my hands around the mug. Aldrich tapped the folder once. "I didn't know how else to tell you." I waited. "She's been hiding things," he said. "From me. From everyone." He undid the clasp and slid the folder across to me. Inside were copies, scanned documents, emails, screenshots of bank activity. The first page was a wire transfer receipt, $10,000. From a personal account I didn't recognize straight into Delilah's. The memo line read, "Retainer Hush Project." I looked up. Aldrich's hands were folded tightly, knuckles white. "She told me it was consulting," he said, "for a friend who was starting a company." The next few pages were more of the same. Transfers from different names, all with vague subject lines. Some were deposits, others were withdrawals sent to prepaid cards. "She's been taking payments under the table," he said, "for over a year. Private deals. I think some of them were scams." I kept turning pages. A lease agreement unsigned. A down payment made to a developer in Nevada, another in North Carolina. "She was planning to move," I said. He nodded. "Without me." The last item in the folder was a printout of an email thread between Delilah and someone named M. Gaines. They discussed options for selling off antique furniture, the real stuff, before a formal estate transfer. They mentioned a closing date. "The date of my sale." She was trying to liquidate the house, I said. "Before the papers were signed. I think she was hoping to get the cash and leave before you found out," Aldrich said. "The only reason it didn't happen is because the buyers insisted on a full walkthrough the day before closing. That's when she panicked." I sat back. "Let it all sink in. I confronted her," he said, 2 nights ago. She denied it at first, said it was old, just ideas. Then she told me it wasn't any of my business. And the money? She said it was compensation for all she'd put into the family, that she deserved something back. I closed the folder. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked. "Because I don't want any more lies," he said, "and because I think you should do what you need to do." I looked out the window. The trees across the street had turned gold and red, the wind lifting leaves in quiet spirals along the sidewalk. "I have something too," I said. His eyebrows lifted. I reached into my purse and pulled out the copy of the refinance letter. I slid it across to him. He read it quietly. His eyes moved slowly down the page. When he reached the signature line, he stopped. "I didn't write this," he said, "but I didn't stop her either." "She used your name. I should have known," he said. "I should have asked more questions." We sat for a long while, the waitress refilling our mugs without a word. "I'm sorry," he said again. "She made her choices," I said. "And you have yours." He looked down at his hands. "I don't know where to go from here." "You start by being honest," I said, "with yourself, with Tabitha, and you make things right." He nodded. After we paid the check, I walked back toward the apartment. My shoes clicked softly against the pavement. I passed a mother pushing a stroller, an elderly man walking a small dog, a teenager skateboarding past the bus stop. When I reached my building, I took the elevator up and placed the folder inside the same drawer where I kept the red envelope. Then I sat at the kitchen table and turned on the small desk lamp. Its soft glow filled the space. The clock read 6:45. By 7:00, I had printed 3 copies of everything. One went in the folder, one went into an envelope addressed to my attorney, and one I kept for what was coming next. The courthouse was quiet that morning, the kind of stillness you only get right before the doors open and the day's business begins. I sat on the bench outside room 212, my purse on my lap, and the envelope sealed in my hands. A bailiff passed with a clipboard, nodded politely. Somewhere down the hall, a copy machine clicked and hummed. At 8:29, the doors opened. I stood and walked inside. The judge was a woman about my age. Her robe looked freshly pressed, her hair tucked behind one ear. She greeted me kindly, looked through the file I'd submitted, and asked if I wanted to make a statement. I said no. Everything she needed was in the papers. Inside that envelope were 4 items, the forged refinance letter with Aldrich's signature replicated at the bottom, the recorded confirmation from the bank that I'd never authorized the loan, a timeline of the property's title history showing Delilah's attempts to pre-sell assets, and a notarized affidavit from Aldrich himself stating he had not consented to or initiated any refinance on my behalf. The judge nodded after reviewing it all. "This is more than sufficient," she said. "We'll proceed with your request to freeze the transaction and initiate a fraud investigation." I thanked her. She gave me a soft smile and handed the file to the clerk. By noon, the county placed a hold on the sale of the house. The escrow company had already received the check from the buyers but hadn't released the funds. That hold meant Delilah couldn't access a dime of it. I didn't call her. I didn't tell her. I let the paperwork do the talking. That afternoon, I called Tabitha. I told her I needed her to meet me at the house alone and that I'd leave the side gate unlocked. She arrived a little after 300. I watched her through the kitchen window as she walked across the yard in her slacks and flats, her phone in hand, scanning the porch like she wasn't sure she should be there. I opened the door and let her in. "I know you didn't know," I said before she could say a word. "And I know she probably told you it was all fine. She said it was your idea," Tabitha said, stepping inside, "that you wanted to be rid of the place." I led her into the dining room where the folder still sat on the table. "I'm not angry with you," I said, "but you should see for yourself." She sat down and flipped through the documents one by one, slower than I expected. When she got to the lease agreements, her hand trembled a little. "She told me she was helping you downsize," she said. I didn't say anything. She kept turning pages. Her lips pressed into a tight line when she saw the email with the subject line "Antique Offload" before record pulls. "She told me not to ask questions," she said. "Said it was complicated." "It was simple," I said. She thought I'd let it go. Tabitha leaned back in the chair, her hands in her lap. She's been trying to get me to co-sign something, she said quietly. A line of credit. I looked at her. She said it was for improvements, kitchen work. But it felt rushed. She wanted me to sign without reading. We sat there for a moment, the late afternoon light cutting long shadows across the floor. She forged Aldrich's name, I said. That's how she got the refinance through. Tabitha nodded slowly. She's my sister, she said. But you've always been my mother. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. She stood quietly and said she'd be in touch. Delilah called 2 days later. I let it go to voicemail. Then she showed up in person. I had just stepped out of the grocery store when I saw her standing by my car. She had on a long beige coat, sunglasses too large for her face, and a tension in her shoulders that made her look smaller than usual. You froze my accounts, she said as I approached. I didn't answer. You've humiliated me, she said. That was my house too. It wasn't, I said. Not legally. She took a step forward. I'm your daughter. No, I said. You're a woman who made a choice. She looked like she might spit something cruel, but instead, she turned and walked away. That was the last time I saw her in person. The investigation moved quickly after that. With the affidavit, the forged documents, and the financial trail, the DA's office opened a formal case. I didn't push for charges. But they filed them anyway: wire fraud, attempted theft, forgery. Aldrich called to let me know she'd taken a plea deal. Minimal jail time, but full restitution required. She would have to repay everything she'd taken, every cent. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table again, same spot where I'd signed my affidavit. The house felt different. Still quiet, still familiar, but there was a lightness to it now. A kind of stillness that didn't ache. The next morning, I pulled the red envelope from the drawer and placed it next to the coffee pot. Inside it was a check addressed to Tabitha and a letter. She didn't speak to me when the judge handed down the final ruling. Not a glance, not a word. Delilah sat stiff-backed beside her attorney while the court confirmed what the evidence had already made clear: fraud, identity theft, financial coercion. The trust would be dissolved and reissued, this time with proper oversight. The house remained in my name. The damage she'd done was tallied in numbers and restitution schedules. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt still. Afterward, Tabitha waited for me outside the courthouse. She didn't say much either, just walked beside me to the car, our shoes tapping across the concrete in quiet rhythm. Halfway through the drive home, she reached across the console and took my hand. We didn't let go until we pulled into the driveway. In the days that followed, the house was quieter. I stopped checking the porch for mail I knew wasn't coming. The nameplates Delilah had ordered for her studio came down. I boxed up the files she'd left behind, the ones she claimed she was managing on my behalf, and stored them in the attic beside old Christmas ornaments and photo albums we hadn't opened in years. One morning, I found a small envelope tucked into the side of the recipe book I used every Sunday. It was Tabitha's handwriting. Inside was a card with soft blue flowers on the front, and just one line inside: "Thank you for not giving up on me." I sat at the kitchen table and held it for a long time. By spring, she was coming around more often, not to fix things or sort papers, just to sit. We'd drink tea in the den with the windows open and the sound of the wind coming through the screen. She brought stories now about the apartment she was thinking of renting, the photography class she wanted to try. Her shoulders sat lower, her laugh came easier. And I never once asked about Delilah. That part of our story had closed. Sometimes healing doesn't look like reconciliation. Sometimes it's a daughter finding her own breath again. Sometime, it's a mother learning how to stop apologizing for needing peace. I've stopped trying to explain what happened to the neighbors. They still wave when I walk Toby down the block, but I no longer feel the need to fill in the blanks behind their curious eyes. I know what I lived, and I know what I kept safe: my home, my name, my heart. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after someone tried to rewrite it for you, I hope you know this: you don't need permission to protect what's yours. And you don't need an apology to move forward. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story reminded you of your own quiet strength, feel free to share it or just take a breath and know you're not alone.